The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the dense forest. In the distance, the sound of rustling leaves could be heard as a lone figure trudged along the forest path, his boots crunching on the dry ground. His name was David. He had always been a man of the wild, someone who preferred the solitude of nature over the noise of city life. But today, something was different. Something was pulling him deeper into the woods than he had ever gone before. David had heard the rumors from local hunters, the kind of whispers that seemed too unbelievable to be true. Tales of a bear caught in a hunter's trap. They said it was a massive creature, a beast that was unlike any other, with fur as black as the midnight sky and eyes that glowed with a strange, almost unnatural, fire. Most dismissed it as nonsense, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him in the woods. As he walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The path became less clear, overtaken by thick underbrush and fallen leaves. David's breath quickened as he pushed forward, a sense of urgency building in his chest. Then, just as he was beginning to doubt the rumors, he saw it. There, in a small clearing, was the unmistakable shape of a massive bear, its powerful frame struggling against the heavy chains that bound it to the ground. The creature's eyes were wide with panic, its breath coming in short, labored gasps. The trap was merciless, its iron teeth digging into the bear's leg, leaving deep gashes that bled freely. The bear growled, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the trees. David froze, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. The bear's gaze met his, and for a split second, it was as though time itself had stopped. The two locked eyes, each aware of the other's presence, yet neither willing to make the first move. David's mind raced. He had no tools, no weapons, nothing to free the bear. He had never been in a situation like this before. But something inside him told him that he couldn't just walk away. The bear, sensing David's hesitation, let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing in warning. David's hand instinctively went to his pocket, his fingers brushing the small knife he always carried with him. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He knew that freeing the bear wouldn't be easy. The trap was heavy, and the chains were thick. But he couldn't leave it there, suffering. Steeling himself, David approached the bear slowly, speaking in a soft, soothing voice. "It's okay, I'm not here to hurt you," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if the bear could understand him. He had read about wild animals and their ability to sense fear, and he knew that if he showed any sign of hesitation or panic, it could end badly. The bear's eyes softened slightly, but it still eyed him warily. David took a deep breath and kneeled down beside the creature, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the trap. The metal was cold to the touch, and the blood from the bear's leg had begun to congeal around the jagged edges of the iron teeth. It was clear the creature had been struggling for hours, maybe even longer. With every movement, the trap dug deeper into its flesh, causing the bear to flinch and growl in pain. David's fingers brushed against the metal, searching for a weak point. His heart raced as he applied pressure, trying to lift the trap enough to release the bear's leg. The animal shifted its weight, making the task even more difficult. David could feel the raw power of the beast beneath him, its muscles tensing and shifting with every movement. The last thing he wanted was to get too close to the bear's claws or teeth, but he knew he had to act quickly. With a final grunt of effort, David managed to pry the trap open just enough to slide the bear's leg free. The animal let out a roar of pain and anger, stumbling forward before collapsing onto its front legs. David quickly backed away, his eyes never leaving the creature. The bear's chest rose and fell in rapid succession as it struggled to regain its bearings. For a moment, everything was still. David watched, unsure of what the bear would do next. It had been trapped for so long, its instincts, its hunger, and its rage must have been overwhelming. But instead of attacking, the bear simply stared at him, its gaze no longer filled with fear or aggression, but with something else, something like recognition. David held his breath, waiting for the bear to make its move. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange connection to the creature. There was a moment, just a split second, where it seemed like the bear understood that David had helped it. But then, as quickly as it had come, the moment passed, and the bear turned away, limping toward the dense trees. David watched the bear disappear into the shadows of the forest, a sense of relief flooding over him. It was over. The bear was free. But as he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a sense of foreboding that settled deep in his bones. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something was coming. The forest felt too quiet, too still. As he retraced his steps back toward the path, his eyes darted around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow darted between the trees, just a flash of movement that sent a chill down his spine. David's heart raced as he froze, every muscle in his body tense. The shadow had moved too quickly for him to get a good look, but he was certain he had seen something, or someone. The air seemed to grow even colder, and the rustling of the leaves grew louder, as though the forest itself was alive with whispers. David turned back toward the clearing, his instincts telling him that he wasn't alone. His grip on the knife tightened as he slowly made his way back. The clearing was empty now, the bear gone, but there was something else, something darker, lurking in the shadows. David's eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. The trap was still there, lying on the ground, but it didn't seem like it had been left by the bear. No, this was something else, something that didn't belong in this part of the forest. As he stepped closer, he noticed the faintest traces of fresh blood on the ground. His stomach twisted in knots. It was the bear's blood, but it was more than that. There was something else. Something had followed the bear. Suddenly, he heard it. A low growl, distant at first, but growing louder with every passing second. It was the same guttural growl he had heard earlier, but this time it was different. It was more menacing, more dangerous. David's heart pounded in his chest as the growl grew louder, closer. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The bear couldn't have gotten far, so what was this? Another predator? Or something else entirely? Before he could react, the growl erupted into a roar, so loud and powerful that it rattled the trees around him. And then from the shadows, it emerged. The creature was massive, even larger than the bear he had just freed. It was a wolf, but not like any wolf David had ever seen. Its fur was matted with dirt and blood, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. It looked at David with an intelligence that sent a shiver down his spine. This was no ordinary wolf. It was something much darker, something that had been waiting for this moment. David's mind raced. He had to act fast. The knife in his hand felt useless against the creature before him. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to flee, but the wolf was faster, its growl rising in pitch as it lunged toward him. The last thing David saw before everything went black was the wolf's glowing eyes, and the terrifying realization that the forest was no longer a place of solitude. It was a battleground. And the real nightmare was only just beginning. David's world went dark. His vision blurred, his head spun, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was alive. The air was thick with a pungent scent of wet earth and blood. His senses were muddled, disoriented. As he stumbled forward, his legs weak and unsteady, the memory of the wolf's glowing eyes haunted him. His body screamed in pain, but there was no time to rest. He could feel the crushing weight of the forest closing in around him. He had to move, had to escape. But where? The path was lost to him now. He was deep in the wilderness, and he didn't even know if he was still being followed. The growl had stopped, but the silence was far more terrifying. It was the kind of silence that made his blood run cold, the kind that came before something far worse. David's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as he leaned against a tree for support. His pulse hammered in his ears, a constant reminder of his fragility. He blinked, trying to clear the haze from his vision, but his head was still spinning, his body still shaking from the encounter with the wolf. He knew he couldn't keep going like this. If the wolf hadn't finished him off, the forest would. The thought alone was enough to ignite a surge of adrenaline, pushing him forward once more. But it wasn't just the wolf that haunted him now. No, there was something more sinister, something lurking at the edge of his awareness. The bear, that massive creature he had freed, had felt different. There had been a strange energy in the air when their eyes locked, a kind of silent understanding between man and beast. But now, as he stumbled through the underbrush, the uneasy feeling lingered. That connection had been too deep, too meaningful, and David couldn't shake the sense that he had stirred something in the forest, something far older and more powerful than he could ever imagine. Suddenly, the air seemed to shift. A gust of wind howled through the trees, bending the branches and sending a chill straight to his bones. The forest whispered, not with the soft rustling of leaves, but with the low, menacing murmur of something far more ancient. David felt it then, an overwhelming pressure, like the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him from all sides. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone, too heavy to move. His heart raced, thudding in his chest like a drumbeat that could only end in disaster. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The bear. It wasn't just standing there, as it had been before. No, it was moving now, slowly, with deliberate grace, stepping between the trees like a shadow come to life. But this was no ordinary bear. Its fur had changed, no longer the soft black it had been. It now shimmered with an ethereal, ghostly light, as though the creature was part of the very fabric of the forest itself. Its eyes, once wild with fear and pain, were now dark pools of ancient knowledge, glowing faintly in the gloom. The air crackled around it, charged with an energy that David couldn't understand. The bear stopped in front of him, standing tall and proud, its massive form casting a long shadow in the fading light. David's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, it seemed to look directly into his soul, as if it could see everything he had ever done, every thought that had crossed his mind. The bear's gaze was both calm and terrifying, filled with an unfathomable depth that made David feel both insignificant and unworthy at the same time. Then, in an instant, the bear moved. It wasn't fast, but it was powerful, each step resonating with an earth-shaking force. It moved closer, its massive paws making the ground tremble beneath David's feet. For a moment, he thought it might attack, that it might tear him apart, as the wolf had almost done. But instead, the bear circled him, its eyes never leaving his, as if it were trying to figure him out, to understand why he had come into its domain. David didn't know what to do. He couldn't run. His legs refused to move. All he could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the creature loomed over him. The tension in the air was thick, and David could feel the weight of something primal pressing down on him. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the bear lowered its head, nudging David gently with its massive snout. The contact sent a shock through David's body, an electric pulse that made his skin tingle. It was a strange sensation, like the bear was offering him something far beyond the physical touch of an animal. The moment was fleeting, but it felt like it lasted an eternity. In that brief instant, David felt a deep connection to the creature, one that transcended words, one that reached into the very core of his being. It was as if the bear were speaking to him without uttering a single sound, communicating a message that only he could hear. But what was the message? What was the bear trying to tell him? Before he could process the overwhelming emotions that flooded his chest, the bear stepped back, its eyes still fixed on him. The connection was broken, and David was left standing in the silence, once more, his heart pounding in his ears. The creature didn't leave, though. It simply stood there, watching him, waiting. The world around him seemed to shift once again. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows in the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The forest felt alive, like it was aware of him, watching his every move. David had never felt so small, so insignificant. It was as if he were standing at the edge of a vast, unknowable chasm, one that threatened to swallow him whole if he made the wrong move. And then, as if in response to his thoughts, the bear turned away, its massive form disappearing into the trees. David's breath caught in his throat. Was it leaving him? Had the connection been broken? He didn't know. He didn't understand. He wanted to call out to the bear, to ask it what it had meant, to demand some kind of answer. But his voice was lost in the silence. Instead, he stood there, staring at the spot where the bear had disappeared, unsure of what to do next. Should he follow it? Should he leave the forest entirely? What had just happened? He had come into this wilderness seeking answers, but now the only thing he had were more questions. But as he took a tentative step forward, something strange happened. The ground beneath his feet shifted, the earth trembling as though something massive was moving beneath it. The trees groaned, their branches swaying violently despite the absence of wind. David's heart skipped a beat, and he spun around, his senses on high alert. And then he saw it, the wolf. The massive, glowing-eyed predator that had nearly torn him apart earlier was now standing at the edge of the clearing. Its eyes were still glowing with that eerie, unnatural light, but there was something else there now, something darker, something far more malevolent. The wolf's growl echoed through the trees, low and menacing, as it stalked closer, its eyes locked on David with a hunger that sent chills down his spine. David's pulse raced as he backed away, his mind frantic. The wolf was not alone. Behind it, emerging from the shadows, came something even worse. A figure draped in dark, tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. The figure moved with unnatural grace, its presence sending a cold shiver through the air. It was as if the very essence of the forest had come to life, manifesting in a form that was both human and something else entirely. David stumbled backward, his mind reeling. What was happening? Who was this figure? And what did it want with him? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. He was no longer in control of his fate. The forest had taken over, and he was just a pawn in its game. The wolf howled, and the figure stepped forward, its movements deliberate, purposeful. David had nowhere to run. The forest had closed in around him, and he was trapped, caught between the primal forces of nature and something far darker, far more ancient. The air crackled with the energy of the unknown, and David knew that whatever happened next would change his life forever. The forest had spoken, and David had listened. But now it was time to pay the price. David's chest tightened, his mind racing. The wolf's growl was like a death sentence hanging in the air. The figure cloaked in darkness was now only a few steps away, its presence chilling, a void that seemed to swallow all warmth and light. The sound of his heartbeat was deafening in his ears, the adrenaline flooding his system, as his mind searched desperately for a way out. But there was none. His legs were frozen, too weak from the earlier encounter to carry him anywhere. The bear, the strange creature that had both saved and confused him, was nowhere to be seen now. It had disappeared into the trees, leaving him to face this unknown terror alone. He turned his gaze back to the wolf, its glowing eyes locked onto him, with an unyielding hunger. It was a predator in the truest sense, and David was its prey. But as much as fear clawed at him, there was something else that gripped his heart, something deeper, a strange pull that went beyond mere survival. The figure cloaked in robes stepped closer, its feet silent against the ground, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Every part of the forest seemed to hold its breath as it drew near, the leaves and branches trembling, as if even the trees were afraid of what it represented. David felt the oppressive weight of its gaze, though he couldn't see its face beneath the dark hood. There was something ancient, something malevolent about this being that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just the fact that it was cloaked in darkness. There was something about its presence that felt wrong in every possible way. The air itself seemed to bend around it, growing colder, heavier. The wolf, once just a threat, now seemed like an extension of the figure's will, a tool of its power. David's breath hitched as the figure raised a gloved hand, slow and deliberate, the air around it vibrating with a low, almost imperceptible hum. The wolf's growl deepened, its body tensing, ready to pounce, its eyes locked onto David's with a chilling focus. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to blur, the forest closing in around him as if it were shifting, the boundaries between reality and nightmare starting to dissolve. The wolf's hunger was now a physical force pressing against him, pushing him further into the corner where he had no escape. He could feel the weight of its predatory intent, thick and suffocating. "You're not meant to be here," a voice hissed from beneath the figure's hood. It was low and guttural, each word dripping with malice. It felt like the earth itself was speaking through this creature, as though the voice was an extension of something far older than time. The forest has awakened, and so must you. But you're not ready. You were never meant to find this place. David wanted to scream, to fight back, but his throat had gone dry, his words caught in the terror that gripped his chest. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, but his body wouldn't respond. It was as if the forest itself was holding him in place, binding him with invisible chains. The wolf's eyes bored into him, its hunger more tangible now, its movements synchronized with the figure's own steps, as if they were two sides of the same coin. They were not separate entities. They were one. Together, they were the embodiment of this dark power that had called him into the forest. "You saved the bear," the figure continued, its voice growing colder. "Foolish, naive man. Do you know what you've done? You've awakened something ancient, something primal. And now you will pay the price." David's heart raced as the figure's words hit him like a hammer. The bear. It wasn't just a creature of the forest, a mere animal trapped in a hunter's snare. No, it was something far more significant. It was part of the forest, part of the very fabric that bound this place together. When David freed it, he had unknowingly disturbed the balance, called forth something that had lain dormant for centuries. The wolf moved, its muscles rippling beneath its fur as it crept closer, its gaze never wavering from David. The figure behind it raised its other hand now, and David could feel the air growing thick, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. Something was happening, something that he didn't understand, but he knew it wasn't good. The forest was alive, and it was angry. "You think you can undo the damage?" the figure mocked. "You cannot stop what is already set in motion. The forest will claim you, just as it has claimed so many before you." David's chest tightened even further, his lungs fighting for air. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, racing in every direction, trying to make sense of the horror unfolding before him. The wolf, the figure, the ancient power in the air, it was all too much to comprehend. His survival instincts were screaming at him, telling him to fight, to flee, but all he could do was stand there, paralyzed, as if the very presence of these beings was erasing his will to act. But then, just as the figure raised its hand again, preparing to unleash whatever dark magic it had over him, something shifted. The air seemed to crackle with a different energy, one that wasn't cold and oppressive, but warm, familiar. David couldn't explain it, but it was there, a subtle hum beneath the surface, like the pulse of something alive. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. The bear, the same creature that had saved him, the one he had freed, was back. From the shadows of the trees, the massive form of the bear emerged once more, but it was different now. It had grown, its size increasing exponentially, its fur now shimmering with an ethereal glow that illuminated the darkness around it. The bear's eyes no longer held the wildness they had once shown. Instead, there was a deep, knowing wisdom there, a connection to something beyond the physical realm. The forest seemed to bend to its will as it stepped forward, its presence overwhelming, a force of nature in its purest form. The wolf snarled, its ears flattening as it turned to face the bear. The tension in the air became palpable, the forest holding its breath as these two primal forces came face to face. The figure, too, seemed momentarily stunned, its hood tilting ever so slightly as it watched the bear approach. David could feel the shift in the energy around them. The power that had once seemed to emanate from the figure was now being countered by the bear's force, its glow pushing back the darkness. The wolf growled again, a sound that was more of a challenge than a warning. The bear didn't hesitate. With a speed that belied its size, it lunged at the wolf, its massive paws swiping through the air with the force of a storm. The wolf snapped its jaws in retaliation, but the bear was faster, stronger. The two beasts collided with a deafening crash, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The figure moved, but not quickly enough. It reached out as if to control the fight, but something in the air stopped it. The bear's energy, whatever force had awakened inside it, was too powerful. It resisted. David stood frozen, watching in awe and fear as the battle between these primal forces unfolded before him. The wolf and the bear were locked in a vicious struggle, each determined to assert its dominance. The forest around them seemed to respond, the trees bending and shifting as if they were part of the conflict, branches crashing together, roots twisting beneath the earth. For what felt like an eternity, the two creatures fought, neither giving ground, each one determined to win. But as the battle raged on, something strange began to happen. The air grew thick with the energy of the forest, and the sounds of the struggle seemed to fade into the background. It was as though time itself had stopped, and all that remained was the force of nature colliding, pushing against each other in a cosmic dance. And then it happened. The wolf, with one last desperate snarl, leaped at the bear, its teeth bared, its body twisted in midair. The bear, exhausted but resolute, swiped its massive paw once more, connecting with the wolf's chest in a single, crushing blow. The wolf let out a strangled cry as it was sent flying through the air, crashing into the trees. It lay motionless, its once glowing eyes now dull and lifeless. The forest fell silent. David could hardly believe what he was seeing. The bear stood tall, victorious, its fur still glowing with that otherworldly light. But it wasn't finished. Slowly, it turned its head toward David, its eyes locking onto his once more. There was a knowing look there, a silent communication that passed between them. The bear had saved him. It had protected him from the darkness that had threatened to consume him. But there was more. The bear's power was not of this world. It had come to David for a reason, and that reason had yet to be revealed. The forest had been disturbed, but its balance had been restored, for now. David didn't know what the future held, but as he stood there, in the shadow of the victorious bear, he understood one thing. The forest was alive, and it had chosen him. David stood frozen, a mixture of awe and fear coursing through his veins. The forest, once a place of peace and serenity, now felt like an uncharted wilderness, alive with power and mystery. The bear's eyes locked with his, and for the first time, David felt a connection, a deep, inexplicable bond. It was as if the bear knew something about him, something hidden in the very marrow of his bones, something he hadn't yet discovered. But the question was, what did it mean? What had he become part of by freeing the bear? The struggle, the battle, the strange magic in the air, it all swirled around him, creating a storm of uncertainty and wonder. The bear's massive form shifted slightly, its coat still glowing faintly with that ethereal light. It was no longer just an animal. It had transcended that role, becoming something more, a guardian of the forest, a protector of forces far older and deeper than anything David had ever known. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering in a language David couldn't understand, but it felt as though the entire forest was speaking to him, urging him to stay, to listen. For a moment, he forgot about the strange cloaked figure and the deadly wolf lying motionless on the ground. The only thing that mattered now was the presence of the bear, the creature that had chosen him, and in doing so, had thrust him into a world he was not prepared for. The bear stepped forward, its powerful movements graceful despite its size. It circled David slowly, its gaze never leaving him, as though measuring him, studying him. The air seemed to hum with energy, and David could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on him. Every inch of the forest was alive, alive with secrets, alive with magic, and now he was part of it. But how? Why had he been the one to encounter this creature? There had been no rhyme or reason to his actions when he freed the bear from the trap, no plan, no forethought. He had acted on impulse, driven by a sense of compassion and helplessness. Yet here he was, standing at the center of something ancient, something far beyond the realm of human understanding. As the bear moved in a slow, deliberate circle around him, David's thoughts raced. What had the cloaked figure meant when it said, "The forest will claim you"? Was he now bound to this place, to this world of spirits and magic? He thought back to the figure, the hooded, dark presence that had loomed over him. Its voice had dripped with menace, its every word laced with threats. "You've awakened something ancient," it had said. David shuddered at the memory. What had he done? And why had the figure wanted to stop him from freeing the bear? Was the bear more than just a creature trapped in a hunter's snare? Was it a guardian? A key to something far more dangerous? His mind was spinning, and the more he thought about it, the more questions flooded his thoughts. He hadn't felt the presence of the bear's power before. It had only seemed like an animal to him. But now, standing in its presence, it was clear that it was something far more significant. It wasn't just an animal. It was a force of nature, a living manifestation of the wild magic of the forest. But what did it want from him? What did it see in him that had caused it to save him and bring him closer to the center of this mystery? The bear stopped in front of him, its massive form looming over David. Its breath was slow and steady, and for a brief moment, David thought he saw something like a smile, or at least the closest thing a bear could give. There was an understanding there, a silent recognition that seemed to bridge the gap between the human and the animal. The forest was alive, and David was part of it now. There was no going back, no escape. And then, as if answering his unspoken thoughts, the bear dipped its head and nudged David gently with its nose. The contact was soft, almost affectionate, but there was power behind it, an undeniable strength that David could feel coursing through him. He had been chosen. He didn't know why or how, but he had been brought into the fold of something far greater than himself. Suddenly, the bear raised its head and let out a low, resonating growl that reverberated through the trees. The sound was deep and haunting, echoing across the forest. David instinctively stepped back, his heart pounding. The bear's gaze shifted, moving past him, and David turned to follow its stare. He saw nothing at first, just the darkness of the forest. But then something emerged from the shadows, a figure. It was tall, draped in shadows, its face hidden beneath a dark hood, its form shifting unnaturally in the moonlight. David's breath caught in his throat. The figure, the same one that had spoken to him earlier, the one that had threatened him. It was here again, its presence as suffocating as before. But this time, it didn't speak. It simply watched, its glowing eyes fixed on David and the bear, a smirk playing on its lips. "You think you've won," the figure finally said, its voice like gravel being ground beneath heavy boots. "But you have no idea what you're up against. The bear is but a pawn in a game far beyond your comprehension." David's heart raced again. The figure spoke with such confidence, with such disdain for him, that it was as if it saw him as nothing more than an obstacle, something to be eliminated. But the bear stood firm in front of him, its massive body a wall of protection. The air between them crackled with tension, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. "What do you want?" David asked, his voice steady despite the rising fear within him. He couldn't back down now. He had to confront this figure, whatever it was, if he ever hoped to find peace. "Why are you doing this?" The figure's laugh was cold and mirthless, a sound that sent shivers down David's spine. "What I want is irrelevant," it said. "The forest wants balance, and you, David, have disturbed that balance. You freed the bear, but you failed to understand what it truly represents. It's not a simple creature, not a mere animal. It is a keeper, a protector of something far older than you can fathom. And you, by freeing it, have unknowingly invited chaos." David shook his head, his confusion deepening. "What chaos? What are you talking about?" The figure's eyes gleamed with dark amusement. "You'll understand soon enough. The bear's power isn't what you think it is. It was never meant to be free. It's tied to something far more dangerous, something that must never be unleashed. And now that you've awakened it, you've set events in motion that cannot be undone." David's mind raced, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. The bear had protected him, saved him from a wolf, and yet now he was being told that its very existence was part of some grand, terrifying design. What had he done? He hadn't meant to interfere with anything. He had just wanted to save the animal. But this was something entirely different. The figure stepped forward, its long, shadowed form moving with eerie grace. "You are part of this now, whether you like it or not. The bear is your link to the forest, but it will also be your downfall. Mark my words, David. There is no escaping the consequences of your actions." David felt a chill seep into his bones, the figure's words wrapping around him like chains. He was trapped, caught in a web of forces he didn't understand, forces far beyond his control. The bear, the figure, the wolf, they were all part of something ancient, something far older than the world he had known. And now he was tied to it. But as the figure continued to speak, David felt something shift within him. He wasn't alone. The bear was still there, standing firm, its glowing eyes watching him with an intensity that made his heart swell with a strange kind of courage. He wasn't powerless. He wasn't just a pawn in this game. He had freed the bear, and he could stand against whatever came next. "What do you want from me?" David demanded, his voice louder now, steady with resolve. "If the bear is part of something dangerous, then what are you going to do about it? You're the one who's trying to control everything, not me." The figure's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, David saw something resembling anger flicker in its gaze. "You'll see soon enough," it said, its voice low and menacing. "But know this, you've made your choice, and the forest will have its price." With those final words, the figure vanished, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. The air seemed to grow still, as if the entire forest had exhaled a collective breath. David's heart pounded in his chest, but as he looked at the bear, he felt a sense of resolve settle over him. Whatever this was, whatever dark force had claimed the forest, he wasn't going to let it take control. He would find a way to stop it. The bear had chosen him for a reason, and now it was up to him to uncover the truth behind the mystery.